On number 11, we want to indicate the regions of positive and negative charge on the water molecule. And when you look at water molecules in detail, these are going to be polar covalent bonds, and that means that you're going to have the electron shifted over towards the strong member of that covalent bond, which is the oxygen. And so when that happens, you have extra electrons or extra negative charge on the oxygen end, so that's where my negative would be. And then we're short on our electrons over on the over on the hydrogen ends, so that's going to make those a little bit positive. And then if we remember that opposite charges attract, I'm just going to write that here. We remember that, then we can answer this next question. Because on the next one, we want to know, indicate any of the following locations where a hydrogen bond might form with the oxygen end of a water molecule. Well, the oxygen end, that would be my little point right here, that is negative. So that right there will be attracted to something that has a positive end to it. And so for that to happen, we need to have some other polar covalent bonds in there that are going to create little areas of positive charge. So if I go through here and I kind of label my polar covalent bonds, and this would be the same way we did on previous questions, this would be a polar covalent bond. So with this one, this, and here. Okay, so that's the first step, is label all the polar covalent bonds. And then once we've done that, we want to just label any areas where we would have the little positive regions. And so this area is going to be positive. This would be positive. The carbon here would be positive. And then over here would be positive. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing the positive around the weaker member of the polar covalent bond. And then once we know that, that is where a hydrogen bond might form with the oxygen end of the water molecule. So if we draw our water molecules in here, they would orient kind of like this with the pointed V around those hydrogens that have the positive charge. So the actual hydrogen bond would be like this. So we'd have a little attraction there. Okay, so that would be that particular question. If we look at the next one, we want to know the locations where a hydrogen bond might form with the hydrogen end of a water molecule. Well, it's a similar question, but the hydrogen end, if we just draw, again, our water molecule, the hydrogen ends have a positive charge to them, so they will be attracted to something that has a negative charge. And so this thing that's going to have the negative charge, that would be the strong member of a polar covalent bond. So if we go through just like we did in the previous one, and we first label all of our polar covalent bonds, I'm going to do that really quickly here for us. Okay, and so that would be all the polar covalent bonds. I want to label the areas where I have I'm going to put the negative charge on this particular one. So if I label the areas where I have the negative, here would be the negatives. And so the negative, that is a negative there. The negative is going to be around the strong member. And once we have that, we can then draw in our water molecules. They're going to be bent in the other direction because this time we want the hydrogen ends next to it. So they're going to be kind of like this, if they could squeeze in there. Okay, but it's going to be kind of a tight squeeze in some of the places. Okay, so notice here, if we just draw our little dotted lines in, this is kind of what we would have. Okay, that is where the attraction would be at. So those little attractions, those are the hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are bonds that form between a hydrogen that's already attached in one place. And if we look at that here, you've got a hydrogen here, which is already connected right here to this oxygen, but notice that it can be attracted still to something else. So that's the hydrogen bond. So if I just label what we mean by a hydrogen bond right here. If we start labeling molecules as being either hydrophobic or hydrophilic, that really applies to how they interact with water, or in other words, is water able to really surround and coat the surface of those molecules? And the important thing here is to remember that water interacts with opposite charges. So in order for water to really surround or interact with a molecule or a region of a molecule, there needs to be some little areas of charge there. So that means that we probably need to have a lot of polar covalent bonds in that molecule. So if we look at the first one and we label our bonds as being wherever the polar covalent bonds are at, this is polar. We actually have a lot of polar covalent bonds in that one. And if you have polar covalent bonds, then there's going to be lots of little areas. Remember that anywhere that the strong one is going to be negative, and anywhere that the weak one is going to be positive. And these are only the ones that are actually participating in that particular polar covalent bond. So if you look at this first one, there are little charges all over it and really coating the surface. And so that is going to be a hydrophilic one. So I'm just going to draw a line here. This one is hydrophilic. If we look at the next one and we do the same thing, label all of the polar covalent bonds, and then once we label all the polar covalent bonds, again, we can go in there and we can put the charges, a negative charge on all the strong members, and then a positive charge on all of the weak members. This one as well has a lot of charges scattered over the surface. So this is going to be another hydrophilic one. If we look at the next one, this next one, these are actually all nonpolar. And if you have all nonpolar covalent bonds, then it's neutral over the surface. So this is all neutral. And so there's no charges for the water molecules to interact with. And what that means is that that is going to be hydrophobic if that is the case. And then for the very last one, if we look at it and we label the polar covalent bonds, you have one here and one here. Those are really the only ones that we have. We can still go through and we can label the negative one and we can label the positive ones. But if you look at just the whole molecule, the part that has the charges is really a minor part of the molecule. And definitely water molecules are not going to be able to coat the surface of that. So the vast majority of the molecule is non-polar covalent bonds. So that would be all the bonds that we haven't labeled here. And if that is the case, then it is going to be hydrophobic. So that would be yet another hydrophobic one. For our last question here, we're identifying functional groups. This is one place where memorization becomes very important. So you do need to know what each of these functional groups is going to look like. So to identify them, the hydroxyl, this is when we just have an OH. The methyl is going to be when we have a carbon that would be bonded to 3 separate hydrogens. Okay, so that would be your methyl group. Carbonyl, if I just draw it in here, that's a carbon that has a double bond to an oxygen. And then we call them R's, the other 2 bonds that would be attached there. The carboxyl group is going to be like this. Amino is going to be, if I draw it up here, a nitrogen that has 2 hydrogens attached, and then it would be attached to something else as well. Phosphate, I'm going to draw it down here a little lower. So phosphate group is when you have the phosphorus and it's surrounded by lots of hydrogens, lots of oxygens. And sometimes you will see a hydrogen attached there also. And then the sulfhydryl will just be this situation. Okay, so if we have that in mind, we can go through and we can label any functional groups that we have inside these molecules here. So if we look at the hydroxyl first and we look for just the OHs by themselves, we cannot call this one a hydroxyl group because it's also attached to this part right here. So that would be this one. Actually, I'm just going to draw some dashes here. So notice how this matches. That's your carboxyl. Just to look for any other carboxyls that we might have, it looks like that's the only one. If we change the color, this would be your sulfhydryl. So notice how those match. That is the only example of sulfhydryl that we have. If we look for the amino group next, I'll put that in red. Here is an amino. So notice that that matches what I have in that case. And now we'll do hydroxyls. Hydroxyl groups, this is part of the phosphate, so I'm not going to put that one. This would be a hydroxyl. This will be a hydroxyl, and we have one here, and then also right here. We actually have lots of hydroxyl groups. If we look for the carbonyl, okay, so carbonyl is like this. So here would be our example of the carbonyl group. We don't want to count this one again because instead that's the carboxyl because it's also attached to this portion here. And then for the phosphate group, phosphate is right here. The example of phosphate that we have is this one. If we want to go through and label the methyl group also, methyl, I'm just going to do it in gray. Methyl is when you have the carbon and the 3 hydrogens. This would be an example of the methyl group. Okay, so there we have labeled all of our functional groups. Again, functional groups is something that you just want to memorize. Sometimes flashcards work very well for students for this part of it. Just the structure along with the name of it, that will be very useful when we get into the next chapter and we start really picking out those functional groups as being part of other molecules that we find inside the cell.